glad to see you at our webinar titled Linking Emission Trading System, Research Insights from LIFE DICET. My name is Simone BORGHESI. I'm the director of FSR Climate, the research group on climate change here at the European University Institute. As the title tells, today we want to talk about a topic that those of you who know me also know that is dear to my heart, namely link emission trading system, providing the insights of the ongoing LIFE DICET project, where DICET stands for Deepening International Cooperation on Emissions Trading. The webinar is on the relevance and of the challenges of linking, and it wants to build upon the online training that we had on this topic, which was, I have to say, very successful. We had around 250 registered participants and many active participants. So I'm very glad to use this webinar to discuss this topic that is raising so much interest, and we try to translate research into learning and spread to a wide audience. And so I'm also glad to see many registered participants today. The project is now heading towards the end. We will end in September 2022. And this webinar today wants to discuss two topics in particular. The ETSs with different measures of carbon leakage prevention and the ETS alignment reforms for integration. And to present these topics and then to discuss them with the audience, we will have today two good friends and two collaborators of FSR Climate. And you can already see them connected, Stefano Verde and Baran DODA. Stefano will present and discuss about the first of these two issues, the carbon leakage prevention, which was actually also the object of one of our reports that was published in September. And Baran will talk about the possible reforms for integration in view of the ETS alignment, a topic that is ongoing, that is the object of our research right now. Let me briefly introduce them, also maybe some of our people in the audience already know both Stefano and Baran. Stefano is assistant professor at the Department of Economics and Statistics of the University of Siena. He was deputy director, let's say my own deputy director here at FSR Climate, and member of our team for many years. And he has been adjunct professor at the LUIS in Rome. He is well known for his work on climate and energy, with several participations in projects and scientific articles. And his background, he got a BA from Tor Vergata, Rome, and a master and PhD from the Trinity College, Dublin. Baran is the head of the program Carbon Markets and Pricing at Adelphi. He has a long experience on climate and energy, both with academic and policy research. He works on the design of carbon markets, on the linkages, on the market-based decarbonization policies, and he has been participating in projects of the Federal Ministry of the Environment, of the German Environment Agency, of the European Commission, UNFCCC, West African Development Bank. He is an external collaborator of the LIFE DICET project, and he also supports the secretariat of ICAP, in the International Carbon Action Partnership. I'm pretty sure there would be much more to say, but I don't want to steal your time. So I would start right away and with Stefano, and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Simone, also for the nice presentation of all the bio. Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm going to share my presentation is the end. So I hope you can see it. I guess I assume so. So in my presentation, I will summarize the content of the report that we prepared for the Carbon Market Policy Dialogue last summer, so almost a year ago. The topic is how different measures for carbon leakage prevention in different ETSs can cause competitive distortions and how to address these distortions in the context of a linkage. I will present the conceptual framework, talk about the relevant literature, and also mention a few selected insights from the CMPD itself. As you can see, the conceptual framework is composite. It firstly covers definitions of carbon leakage, the channels through which carbon leakage can occur, the assessment of carbon leakage risk, and it then presents different approaches to carbon leakage prevention, and finally relate anti-leakage measures, competitive distortions, and linkages between ETSs. So first, what is carbon leakage? In general terms, carbon leakage is the phenomenon whereby emission reductions achieved in a jurisdiction are offset to some extent by an increase in emissions abroad. Difference in stringency of climate policy between jurisdictions are the condition for carbon leakage to occur. Specifically, a more stringent climate policy than in other jurisdictions can affect the competitiveness of domestic firms, therefore resulting in both increased production and increased emissions of competing foreign firms. This is the competitiveness channel of carbon leakage, and here anti-leakage measures can certainly do something about it. A second channel through which carbon leakage can materialize is through global energy markets. That is, if one or more jurisdictions with more stringent climate policies than others make up a significant share of global demand for fossil fuels, carbon leakage occurs as a result of reduced fossil fuel prices. In this case, and unlike the previous, governments do not readily dispose of instruments to unilaterally intervene and limit carbon leakage. Now, moving on to anti-leakage approaches, climate policies that regulate energy-intensive and trade-exposed industries are normally accompanied by measures for limiting the risk of carbon leakage related to competitiveness deterioration. If the policy is an ETS specifically, then there are three main approaches to mitigating carbon leakage risk. First, compensated for excessive costs through free allocation of emission allowances. Second, leveling the playing field through border carbon adjustments. And third, directly promoting low carbon innovation. We now connect anti-leakage measures with competitive distortions and linking. Any anti-leakage instrument that a jurisdiction may wish to use needs to be compatible with the broader relevant trade regimes, say the WTO rules, and in the EU, also the European single market. This is always true, that is, whether an ETS is linked to another ETS or not. Now consider linking. On the one hand, by inducing partial or full convergence of allowance prices, ETS linking removes or reduces any internal competitive distortion caused by differences in carbon prices. On the other hand, given differences in carbon leakage prevention, convergence of allowance prices after linking can highlight or even exacerbate competitive distortions. So, what does the literature say? First of all, the most relevant literature to the relationship between differences in anti-leakage measures and linking mainly or only considers differences in free allocation or emission allowances. Okay? So, given that's the case, let's first recall the main approaches to free allocation and then the main indications that we get from the literature. There are three main methods of free allocation: grandfathering, fixed base period benchmarking, and output-based allocation. Under grandfathering, firms simply receive free allowances according to their historical emissions multiplied by an emission factor. In the ETS, grandfathering was used in the first two trading periods, that is up to 2012. Both under fixed base period benchmarking and under output-based allocation, emissions efficiency benchmarks are applied to compute the allocations. The key difference between the two methods is in the output that is considered. It is a level of output in a past base year with fixed base period benchmarking, and it is current output with output-based allocation. Importantly, adjusting allocations to current output, what we have with output-based allocation, means that in effect, firms receive an output subsidy, which all else equal increases with the carbon price. And interestingly, output-based allocation is becoming the most common approach to free allocation. That's what we see across different ETSs, like the New Zealand, the Californian, the Chinese ETS, and partly also the EU ETS now. We summarize the literature according to three issues. First, competitive distortions caused by different allocation rules, regardless of linking. Second, competitive distortions caused jointly by linking and different allocation rules. And third, the harmonization of allocation rules in the context of linking. So, difference in allocation method between ETSs can produce competitive distortions irrespective of linking. I'll give you an example. In one ETS, emission allowances are auctioned, while in another ETS, allowances are grandfathered. Firms under the first ETS clearly incur real carbon costs, while firms under the second ETS only face opportunity costs. So clearly differences in allocation can disadvantage firms that have to purchase more allowances than their competitors. Another example is that of an ETS which uses output-based allocation. Here, regulated firms receive an implicit output subsidy, as I said before, which by definition can distort competition in a market. Let's now consider linking. While linking reduces or eliminates competitive distortions related to carbon price differentials between linked ETSs, it does not address other potential distortions due to difference in allocation rules. In fact, it is possible to think of cases where changes in allowance prices caused by linking accentuate or attenuate competitive distortions given different allocation methods. Output-based allocation in particular stands out as being potentially problematic. I'll give you an example. Consider two ETSs, A and B. Before linking, the allowance price in A is lower than that in B. Moreover, A only uses output-based allocation. So after linking, the allowance price in A will rise, and therefore the implicit output subsidy will rise too. Now, if output-based allocation was already a cause of competitive distortions before linking, the price increase in A after linking would amplify those distortions. Finally, real-world experience with emission trading systems suggests that harmonization of allocation rules is not strictly necessary for a linkage to take place. However, two remarks. First, the importance of harmonization is directly related to the intensity of competition between firms other than different ETSs, something that varies from case to case. Second, harmonization is likely to be increasingly asked for with increased scarcity of emission allowances. Let me conclude with a few selected insights from the CMPD. These are only few, and that the others, you find them in the policy brief that was published only last month, and you will find it online. So one insight comes from empirical research on past energy price increases. And it indicates that within a sector, there are both losing and winning firms. Low productivity firms lose from energy price increases, while high productivity firms win, managing to get some of the market share of the others, of the low productivity ones. The second insight is about border carbon adjustments and export rebates as potentially part of them. Specifically, export rebates run the risk to be considered actionable or even prohibited subsidies under WTO law. I would add that low carbon innovation policies, however, not conditional on exports, may be the way to address carbon leakage that comes with deterioration of domestic firms' competitiveness in international markets. So basically using low carbon innovation policies as opposed to export rebates. Finally, and this speaks specifically directly to linking, the harmonization across ETSs of benchmarks that are used in free allocation is desirable for facilitating linkages between ETSs. With this, I conclude, and thank you for listening. And I pass the stage to Simone.
Thank you, Stefano. Very clear and interesting insights. I think I will go straight ahead to Baran, and then we collect questions from the audience on both presentations, just so that we keep the flow of the presentations going now. So Baran, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Simone. I just want to check that everybody is hearing me okay, and that you can see my slides, and nod from Simone.
Yes, I confirm. Everything is fine.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today's conversation. I arrange my screens. Thank you for bearing with me. This is another part of the research that we're undertaking in this LIFE DICET project. And unlike the previous presentation by Stefano, this is work in progress. And we are currently finalizing the paper that will focus on ETS alignment, possible reforms for carbon market integration. So let me tell you a little bit about how we are thinking about this as we develop our paper. The global carbon market landscape is changing, has been changing since EU ETS came into the picture since 2005. 15, 16 years of experience there. There are now many more ETSs around the world that are currently in operation. So I would like to use this diagram on the right-hand side as a way of illustrating the various types of carbon market. And you may notice that I've switched from emissions trading system to carbon markets, because emissions trading systems where there is a cap and there are compliance obligations are not the only places where units are traded. There are also crediting mechanisms that I will get to in a second. But just to lay out the sort of general structure of this diagram on the right-hand side, we are going to represent each of the emissions trading systems with a circle, and the different colors are there to identify different jurisdictions where an ETS may be in force. Now, in addition to emissions trading systems, there may be crediting mechanisms which exist to satisfy demand from entities regulated by an ETS. These crediting mechanisms are indicated by rectangles of various colors as well, once again indicating the jurisdictions where these reside. So if you look at the top right part of the diagram, where there is the brown ETS and an accompanying crediting mechanism, maybe these are offsets that are allowed into this ETS. Or it may be that these crediting mechanisms, they exist by themselves because they satisfy demand for voluntary offsetting, so that various organizations, public or private, can offset their emissions and make claims about their approach towards net zero targets that they may have set for themselves. One example of the crediting mechanism that exists by itself is, for example, this purple mechanism that you have in the middle of the diagram. Now, international cooperation under Article 6.2 and Article 6.4 envisages links between emissions trading systems. So the two-sided arrows indicate the links between emissions trading systems in the bottom left between orange and green ETSs of different sizes, different volumes, different cap sizes or economic sizes, you could think of. On the right-hand side, you have another one where there are some offset mechanisms that are accompanying the emissions trading system. So you could envisage direct links between such emissions trading systems, or you could think of direct links between emissions trading systems and crediting mechanisms, as, for example, depicted in the top left, between the brown crediting mechanism and the green emissions trading system. These are the direct links, and these existed before Article 6 negotiations were concluded, and they will continue to exist and perhaps flourish, which is partly the topic of our conversation today and more broadly under the LIFE DICET program. Now, but those are not the only links. There could be indirect links established between ETSs through a crediting mechanism. This now, on the top left part of our diagram, exists between the green and the yellow emissions trading system that are both linked to a crediting mechanism. You can think of maybe Kyoto Protocol era where New Zealand and EU ETS were indirectly linked through the CDM mechanism as an example of this. But you could also have indirect links between emissions trading systems where in the bottom left part of the diagram, the blue and orange ETSs are linked indirectly through their links to a common mechanism, the big green emissions trading system. So that is all the different sort of ways, not all, most of the important ways that linking could occur between various carbon markets. But that's not the only type of link that could happen. There are often quantitative or qualitative restrictions that can be in effect in various types of links between crediting mechanisms and emissions trading systems, or between emissions trading systems. These can limit the number of allowances or offsets that can be transferred between the systems. It can be that only certain technologies are allowed into a particular ETS, and many other restrictions that you can think of. There are also restrictions in the form of, for example, discounting as well. Now, I mentioned all of these things in this increasingly complex right-hand side diagram, partly because I want to emphasize what a complex landscape we have, and what the task is at hand, because we need to coordinate this in order for linking to take place. One final point before I move on to what this means is that all of these jurisdictions, which are identified as different colors here, I'm careful in the use of the word jurisdictions because the jurisdictions can be subnational, they could be national, they could be supranational, or they could even be international organizations like the ICAO, where you can have the interaction between, where you can have an emissions trading system or a crediting mechanism in place, where you might contemplate links between them. So very complex picture, very different set of rules applying to each of these systems. How are we ever going to make sense of this in a post-COP26 world? So first, the economics point of view. I'm an economist, and that is my first thinking when I approach questions about how are we going to make sense of this complex landscape and organize it in a way. The idea of linking is that it creates a lot of economic benefits. It has the potential to create a lot of economic benefits. In particular, direct or indirect linking of all carbon markets that are out there without any restrictions on the flow of units between these systems would lead to a cost-effective distribution of the greenhouse gas mitigation effort that is being undertaken in these systems. And this would be good because, in a way, this helps us to either achieve the target that is implicit in the various systems that we have at a lower cost than would be the case without linking, or it could allow us to maintain the level of the cost, but ramp up ambition compared to the case where there is no linking. So linking would allow us to either reduce the cost associated with emissions reductions and decarbonization, or allow us to do that faster or more deeply, the decarbonization effort. And that is the vision of the Paris Agreement, in particular the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which was finally concluded in Glasgow. Now, how is this going to take place? Not only in an economic context, but there are also considerations coming from the political sphere. There are environmental considerations. Some of these are very real. Leakage is one of them that Stefano mentioned. Some of them may be perceived, for example, that jurisdictions may, or audiences within the jurisdictions may feel that this is a loss for the jurisdiction as a whole. All of these economic, political, and environmental considerations will have to be taken together. A few examples of issues that come up is the distribution of the mitigation effort under linking. It will imply a redistribution compared to the situation before linking. It will create winners and losers. There will be big financial transfers, potentially, if there are big allowance or unit transfers across systems. And these may not be politically acceptable. Or jurisdictions may be unwilling to forego the co-benefits of local emissions reductions. Often, CO2 emissions reductions come with the emissions reductions of SOx and NOx, local pollutants, which have local environmental impacts. And if mitigation effort is taking place elsewhere, these will be lost in the jurisdiction, and it can be a consideration. Now, what then needs to happen for these economic benefits of linking to be reaped, and perhaps even pave the way for political and diplomatic benefits as well, so we can ramp up the ambitions of our efforts to reach net zero by the middle of the century. There need to be some preconditions to linking negotiations, and conditions that need to be satisfied during linking negotiations. A few examples of each. First of all, there needs to be general trust between the linking parties. These are this is a condition that is hard to pin down precisely, but without it, there is no way that parties are even going to start talking about how to connect their systems. There also needs to be some overlap of acceptable carbon prices. I'm going to come back to this in a second. And it needs to be beneficial for the parties involved. And I don't mean just for the covered sectors, but also for the economy as a whole, the issue of winners and losers. And there are some conditions that can be satisfied, need to be satisfied during the linking negotiations. These include confidence on the environmental integrity of your partner's systems, and the environmental integrity of the linked system as a whole, as well as some agreement, particularly on market stability mechanisms that may have implications on the price of allowances and credits. The ones identified in red are the ones that I would like to spend now a bit more time talking about. First, a necessary condition for linking, some overlap of acceptable carbon prices. On the right-hand side, you have an example, an ETS A and an ETS B, which the regulators of which have an idea of what is an acceptable carbon price range. I don't mean codified in the way the ETS is designed, but rather a price that is consistent with long-term decarbonization goals without imposing too heavy a burden on the regulated entities. A range results from this. The blue range is in ETS A, and the brown range is for ETS B. You can see that these two ranges overlap in the red area, but the expected linking price that would emerge if these two systems were to link is above this range, within the acceptable range of ETS A, but not so of ETS B. Now, this would be a problem, because this would be difficult to reconcile whatever agreement you have in place, or whatever place you restrictions you put on the price post-linking, because it would be unacceptable to ETSB, the regulators for ETSB. On the other hand, it could be that the ranges do not overlap entirely, but the expected post-link price resides in this green area in the bottom right-hand panel. Now, here you could see that the linking negotiations could proceed. Parties would willingly come to the table and start figuring out all the other things that need to be in place in order for the linking agreement to go ahead. In particular, in the situations where the expected post-link price is within the range, or at least the overlap of the range for the two ETSs, we can envision situations where agreements on market stability mechanisms can ensure that these prices stay in that range or do not diverge too far for too long, so that there's a problem. So in a way, respecting the fact that ETS is a quantity-based instrument, so ultimately market forces determine the price of allowances, extending the market by linking emissions trading systems, we would need this condition of overlap of acceptable carbon prices to be there for linking to go ahead. Now, there are also some necessary conditions for linking that can be addressed during the linking negotiations. These all hinge on the environmental integrity of the two systems. It has many aspects. Here I have a diagram that I unfortunately will not have time to go over. That's a diagram from the ICAP PMR ETS handbook, where the various aspects that need to be aligned, and alignment can here can mean different levels of alignment, before a linking can be smooth and delivering the benefits that are identified as parties going to negotiate. I would like to distinguish between three types of alignment that would be necessary. There are certain design elements of an ETS. These are already determined for the systems that are in operation. They need to be compatible. Without it, there is no way that linking will be successful. There are some elements, such as the type of cap. It is very unlikely that a system with an intensity cap and a system with an absolute cap would be linked. Theoretically possible, but it would be very difficult to agree on. There are some features that must lead to comparable outcomes, but not necessarily need to be aligned so closely. These could be the stringency of the cap. There might be one cap, one system that is a bit more ambitious than the other. Or it could be that the MRV, the approach to MRV is not exactly the same, but leads to similar level of robustness in terms of the outcomes. And there are other aspects of other design features that do not need to be aligned very closely, but would need to would benefit from some coordination and mutual understanding. Here, for example, allocation methods with the condition that Stefano mentioned, that need to depend on the level of competition, level of distortions, compliance periods. These are things that could work with different approaches, but not necessarily in as much harmony as they could be without some understanding. There's one critical element that needs to be aligned quite carefully, and it is that of market stability mechanisms. Here, there are different approaches to ensuring that prices don't rise too high, because rising prices, too high prices, may imply unsustainably high compliance costs or invite opposition from the public, or fall too low, in which case they may be inconsistent with longer-term decarbonization. Different emissions trading systems have approached this question in different ways. There are various tools that are available, highlighted in the red box. Again, a figure coming from the ETS handbook. And experience over the last few years with many big shocks have shown us that they work, and they work well. And in fact, aligning these market stability mechanisms, and in particular, perhaps codifying it into the linking agreement in the form of a price collar provision that both or all linking parties are comfortable with, could help build that trust that prices do not diverge from the ranges that I mentioned in a previous slide. So, what are some key messages that I would like to leave you with in this final slide? First, the global carbon market landscape is very fragmented, very complex, and it's not going to get any easier. With the number of systems increasing, the different types of links, the different types of systems, design features each differing, we need to be thinking about how to link in the future. What sort of reforms will be necessary for making these systems work in harmony together towards achieving their economic benefits. The agreement on Article 6 rulebook can facilitate integration, and it is therefore very welcome. I mentioned that carbon market integration can reduce the cost of meeting the current set of NDCs, or help ramp up the ambition with the ratcheting up mechanism that is envisioned in the Paris Agreement as well. Further carbon market integration requires some key conditions to be met. These will require the reforms that will be the topic of the paper that is currently in progress. Some of these need to be satisfied prior to the start of linking negotiations, others during, and maybe there are still some others that may need to be thought about to ensure that the system remains relevant going forward. And meeting the preconditions does not necessarily mean that a linking agreement will be reached. These negotiations can be time-consuming, take a long time, during which circumstances change. So even if the preconditions are there, a lot of effort is required, but that effort ultimately pays off in terms of the gains from linking. And finally, price level is always the central focus in emissions trading systems, or from a perspective of the market participants, from the perspective of regulators. Here, there are many different mechanisms that are in place to ensure that price is not out of line with what was envisioned originally, without being too prescriptive about it. And provisions, as they exist in emissions trading systems, may be incorporated into the linking agreements about how to deal with the movements of price. That will certainly help making sure that the post-linking prices remain within the acceptable ranges of all parties involved. With that, I'll stop. I took a bit longer than I thought, but I hope it wasn't too long or too uninteresting for you. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Baran. It was certainly not uninteresting. It was a pleasure to listen to your presentation. I noted down a few questions myself, but I prefer to leave the room to the audience in asking questions. So please take advantage of writing the possibility of writing questions in the Q&A, and I see that Olga already did it. So I will start with the question by Olga, which is, I would say, addressed to Baran. Olga is asking, what is the sense to have enhanced linking instead of achieve linking or no linking? I think she's referring to the terminology that you use, Baran.
Maybe, let me see if I understand this question, and if not, Olga is more than welcome to clarify further. So we can think of linking as 0-1 sort of situation, where we have no linking, or we have full unrestricted linking, or we can think of various shades in between those two. So not 0, not 1, but everything that lies in between. And here, what I would like to emphasize is that none of this will come immediately. The experience shows that linking negotiations are very time-consuming, can take many, many years. For example, in the context of the EU and EU ETS and the Swiss ETS, this took several years to negotiate. But in between, there was a lot of alignments happening already. So this means that when you have, for example, the MRV systems being aligned, when you have the legal background aligned, when you have the registries aligned, you're already starting to get some of the benefits of linking, even if there is no trade between the different systems. And then over time, when you reach that point where maybe linking starts with certain restrictions. Another example comes from Norway and EU ETS in the earlier phases of the EU ETS, where there was a one-way link between the two systems. That is a restriction on the unit flows being able to go one way, but not the other. And then over time, that gets removed and you start achieving more and more benefits of linking. So even when the systems are not linked in the way that economists like to talk about them, as trade is happening freely between two systems, there is already a lot of gains that can be had, and working towards that ultimate state of unrestricted flows between systems can help us achieve some of those intermediate gains. This is my reading of the question, but happy to come back to it if there is another way that it was intended.
Thanks, Baran. Actually, while listening to you, I was thinking that the message that you seem to convey, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there are transaction costs which can be relevant in achieving a linking agreement. And we know how important transaction costs are in economic theory. But still, it's worthwhile because the benefits can overcome this cost, and especially if we allow for time, over time, these benefits will emerge. Is that correct?
Yes, that is exactly my thinking. And in fact, the way emissions, the transactions cost come into the argument is quite important. By transactions cost, by the way, I mean things like all of these negotiations and the degree of alignment, and perhaps deviating from your ideal vision of how the ETS was prior to linking, because these all take time, and it requires buy-in from domestic actors which have stakes in the way that the ETS is. So the bigger the gains and smaller the transactions cost, the more likely we are going to move towards this linking state. But transactions cost should in no way be sort of forgotten about. If we do forget about them, if we think that well, there are all these benefits from linking and not think about the costs, it is very unlikely that the negotiations will conclude successfully. One final point in this, it is extremely important to keep in mind that just with any intervention, there will be winners and losers. The point is not that there will not be losers. The point is that taken together, how much the winners win and how much the losers lose, we still end up with something that is better than without linking. So ensuring that the losers are appropriately compensated for the changes that are implied due to the start of linking. Without this, it will again be very, very difficult to successfully conclude the linking negotiation.
Thanks, Baran. Actually, this is a very important point, I think, because it goes back to an important issue, which is the distributional aspects, which we all care very much for, and we all have very present nowadays in this, let's say, in this time, because we see the changes in energy prices, which affect the population, and you are raising another redistributional aspect within sectors, which I found very interesting. I have a question for Stefano now from Irene. Irene is writing, could you please address how carbon leakage mechanism can work in parallel with the ETS linking with other ETSs?
Okay, so it's not clear to me whether Irene refers to I mean, when she says carbon leakage mechanism is anti-leakage measures. So basically what I talked about in the presentation, or more specifically border carbon adjustments. So if it's the first case, then yes, a perfect harmonization in a linking process is not strictly necessary. Okay, so she refers to border carbon adjustments. Okay, well, if two jurisdictions go for linking, and let's say a full linkage, then of course there would be no need of a border carbon adjustment, because the idea is that the two prices would converge fully if it's the case of a full linkage, unrestricted linkage. So that's the first thing to say. So then on, it's also the establishment of a carbon leakage of a border carbon adjustment unilaterally introduces an incentive for precisely because you would avoid to impose basically an adjustment, a price adjustment at the border. It incentivizes integration. So in that sense, a border carbon adjustment can help to facilitate linkages. It poses an incentive. Now we know the decision to link is a complex decision. There are many factors that are taken into consideration. So that incentive may not suffice, but it is an incentive. So that is how the two things are connected, BCA and linkage. I don't know if there's something else that, yeah, okay.
And I want to stay with you for a second, Stefano, because the following question, which is a general one, but I think it's a good follow-up, is Laura is writing, how realistic do you think is it that linking will help or lead to higher climate targets, more ambitious climate targets?
I think that it's a nice question. I think it depends on how much the aim, the policy objective of increasing ambition is strong. So basically, if there's a strong pressure on politicians to increase the ambition, then linking offers an opportunity to achieve that higher level of ambition by linking. So because it reduces the cost of achieving the environmental outcome. So basically, I guess in reality, it depends which is which. It depends on whether there's a strong pressure on increasing ambition in the first place, and that could be also for not pleasant reasons, like an environmental situation that is degrading, that is getting worse. And so there's a need to increase ambition. And it's what if we look at the experience of the EU, we have seen in the last decade, a continuous increase in ambition. And so in that case, using linking, so expanding the market of emissions, can be helpful for sure. And I don't see why this could not happen also in other jurisdictions.
Thank you, Stefano. I have a question. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of the people in this case. I apologize for that. But there is an interesting question for Baran. And your concept of expected post-link carbon prices was the origin of the question. The question is basically expected by whom? Do you mean by politicians? And if this is the case, aren't we heading towards a price collar that becomes a quasi-carbon tax? So Baran, that's the question.
Yeah, this is an excellent question. And when I started reading it as well, I was expected by whom, and my immediate response was that ivory tower economists who are working on theoretical.
I think Edwin just wrote that he's not anonymous now. Thank you, Edwin.
Edwin, excellent question, and you read my mind, because afterwards you also said, as economists, it is indeed the case that it is the expected, in the statistical sense, post-link carbon price, which I did not unfortunately have time to explain with more detail. But the sentiment of your question is very much with me as well. If there is a preference for an emissions trading system in the first place, prior to linking, there is already some level of comfort by the decision makers in the country, in the jurisdiction, to be okay with fluctuations in the price level. And that's precisely the way it should be. It is the market, otherwise we would pick a carbon tax. Now, it may be that the same thing is happening in another jurisdiction, where there is a level of comfort associated with a certain range of prices. If these don't overlap at all, then we are going to have an issue, as I tried to convey in my presentation. If they do overlap, it would perhaps help, in order to achieve the benefits of linking, that there is a mechanism in place, explicitly spelled out, that you cannot deviate from this range very much. Now, if that range is very small, you're right, it would be more or less like one jurisdiction selected an ETS, another jurisdiction selected an ETS, but when they linked, they ended up with a carbon tax. This would not be acceptable. But if there is some meaningful range, then both jurisdictions may be willing to forego some of the range that they're comfortable with, in a way that allows linking to take place, and therefore the benefits from linking to be reaped by both of these jurisdictions. I also see Stefano's hand up. He might, I think, I took the mic away from you, Simone, and I'm now giving it to Stefano.
Thank you, Baran. Yes, I wanted to jump in here because the question is very relevant for the framework that we have proposed, and I think that it's to be clarified that the expected carbon price is not the desired, it's not the expected carbon price by the post-link carbon price, it's not the expected carbon price by politicians or the desired or post-link carbon price, because the desire, I mean, what the politicians, may want to desire is reflecting in the range, what carbon price are they happy with, and there's a range there. But the expected carbon price is basically what a model of linking would predict, and this is, I mean, of course, model there can be of different types, but ultimately, when you have a linkage, you have if it's a full linkage, you have a price convergence. And price convergence will depend on the difference in stringency before linking between the different ETSs, on the size, of course, of the different ETSs. So the expected post-link carbon price is what the model of linking would predicts. Okay, and if what predicts is within the range that the politicians of the two sides or more sides are happy with, then there is an important condition for a precondition for linking that is met.
Great. And talking about this, there is another anonymous question, but important question. I ask Baran, how we could combine an ETS and a carbon tax.
One of my favorite topics, the choice of instrument, the question of instrument choice, going back to mid-1970s, and still without a resolution in terms of how we can do this. I say this tongue-in-cheek. We talk about emissions trading systems. I'll go back to that main idea of 0-1. Either you're linked or you're not linked. Here, the 0-1 emissions trading system, a quantity instrument, and a carbon tax, a price instrument. Yes, they are different, and in their idealized ways that they could be conceived as two choices, but it's not that they are the only two choices. There is a lot that is in between. So, for example, the price colors that came up earlier in today's conversation, if that price color is very wide in an ETS, you have an ETS, the price color could be very narrow, in which case you are moving towards a carbon tax. You can have different mechanisms that place you in between these two extremes of pure ETS and pure carbon tax. And ultimately, the difference does not matter all that much for the outcome that we're, I think, all interested in, which is to put a price on carbon and ensure that the polluters pay that price or take that price into account when making their decisions about what fuel to use today, what sort of technologies to invest in the future, how to generate electricity. Ultimately, there are benefits and costs associated with each of these options of emissions trading systems and carbon taxes. In implementation, carbon taxes can look very much like moving around. You can do this. In fact, when a finance minister facing a recession says, I am freezing the carbon tax that was previously announced is going to increase, this is a way of bringing in that flexibility into what carbon price the regulated entities pay. Similarly, in a situation where the ETS releases allowances that were not previously there or removes allowances that were thought to be there when the system was originally designed from circulation completely, that is intervening to manage the price. So it is not so clear that there is the pure ETS or the pure carbon tax. In reality, we're always somewhere in between, and both of those can serve the purpose of reducing emissions and help us with our mitigation efforts.
Thank you, Baran. The clock is going fast. I will take a very last question from our friend Ted, by the way. It's great to see you. And Ted is asking, basically, do you think that restrictions on linked allowance flows may be necessary to ensure this can happen? So for our process to go on somehow. Maybe Stefano, do you want to answer Ted? Or Baran equally?
I'm happy to have a go. So restrictions are difficult and very helpful at the same time for the following reason. Restrictions, I think, by restrictions, I mean on unit flows, which units can flow in what direction, how many of them can flow from one system to another. Here, they're helpful because they allow you to have the step-by-step gradual approach to the ultimate goal of economists, which is that there is no restriction. Trades and mitigation opportunities determine where that takes place, and this is facilitated by movement of units across systems. So if it is getting us there, then restrictions are helpful and I think can be used. They do limit the benefits that linked jurisdictions can expect to reap from linking compared to the case that there is no restrictions. That is one thing. So the benefits are reduced. The second thing is that once these restrictions are in place, they may stay in place for longer than was originally anticipated. And so this foregone benefits then stay longer, and they may never arrive. So this vested interests are created with each of these restrictions, and making sure that there's a path towards this unified market is important. So I think restrictions are helpful. They are good to have in the beginning, perhaps, provided that we are moving towards this ultimate goal of having a unified market.
Stefano, I see you raise your hand, but you know we are going to trouble because we are late.
Very, very quickly, I just wanted to add to what Baran said that I agree with, that with the model of linking with a collar, so where the restriction is on the price, so there's a price band, there's not the benefits of trade within the collar are full. So, and that's something I think that is a strength of this proposal of linking with a collar, because within the, if the price stays within the, is kept within the collar, within that, the benefits of trade, so the efficiency gains are full, they're not limited.
Okay, so, well, yeah. We have to close, but as you see, there is an inner debate going on, and with Stefano and Baran, we will resume in an hour because we have a meeting among us to go on with our discussion. And I apologize with Bruce, but I don't have the time to take any other question. And by the way, that was an interesting one, but we really have to close now. And let me just remind you to take the survey that you find in the chat, and which would allow us to have your feedback on this event and what we are doing within our project. So having said that, I want to thank you all for being here today with us, for sharing this nice experience with us. And in particular, I thank Stefano and Baran for their interesting presentations. I thank the whole team, actually also the web team who supports us and is patient with us when we are late like today. And having said that, please stay tuned because we will have more on the project in these last months of the project. Thank you all and see you soon.